By the late 1980s, filmmakers like James Cameron had proved that horror combined with sci-fi and action made on big Hollywood budgets could be a huge success. Subsequently, 20th Century Fox had picked up a script called Predator, about a technologically advanced alien stalking and hunting a group of mercenaries in a Central American rainforest. Predator was essentially a slasher horror movie about a bunch of characters being picked off one by a monster until only one final girl remains. However, director John McTiernan cleverly blended the slasher with action and war movie tropes. Instead of a group of disposable teens, here we got a group of hulking, bulked up commandos dripping with masculine energy. And instead of a final girl, we got, at the time, the most bankable movie star in the world, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Get to the chopper!
Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of alien horror and we discuss John McTiernan's macho masterpiece, Predator. Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike Munzer, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. We are currently in the middle of our 7th series exploring the evolution of alien, sci-fi, and cosmic horror, and this is part 13. In this week's episode, as that intro suggested, we are going to be looking at Predator from 1987, and we'll also be talking about Predator 2 from 1990. Both of these conversations will be spoilerific. Go and give both movies a watch before listening to our discussion. They are both a hell of a lot of fun. Joining me to discuss all things Predator, I've got two guests this week. My first guest, many of you who listen to the pod will know him well. You'll also recognise him from the Arrow Video podcast. He is a journalist, podcaster and filmmaker, Sam Ashurst. Hello, Sam.
Hello, Mike. Thank you so much for having me on again. I love talking to you about movies.
I love having you here, Sam. How is everything? How's your 2021 going?
Yeah, it's exciting and busy. Obviously, A Little More Flesh 2 premiered at the Soho Horror Festival earlier in the year. And
yes.
I collaborated with people like Lawrence Harvey from Human Centipede 2 and Lloyd Kaufman from Troma and Lauren Ashley Carter from The Woman for that film. And also introduced some new stars, Harley Dee and Sean Mahoney, in a very different sequel to the original Little More Flesh. It takes things into much darker territory, believe it or not. And I'm very excited to be releasing that movie and the original movie on VHS with the guest that you're yet to introduce, but you will introduce momentarily, Shay, on her label Black Widow. I'm just overwhelmed that I get to see my movies on glorious VHS.
I love it, and what a perfect segue for me to introduce our other guest, Shay. Hello, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for having me on.
No worries, thank you so much for being here. Just for people out there who don't know you, Shay, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do.
Absolutely. Well, I am a podcaster and I'm a label owner, as Sam has said, Black Widow out of Portland, Oregon in the States. And I release horror and cult films on VHS, which is a little bizarre in a world of Blu-ray and 4K. But for me, it's about preservation and resurrection of the format, as well as the films that go on the format. And I put a lot of care and attention into the physical details of the release because, from the advent of VHS, they kind of function as like movie posters as well as films to be watched in your home. And not everybody has a VCR anymore, but having a VCR tape is sort of like having an action figure or a beautiful sculpture on your shelf. And I aim to make every release very beautiful and special. I use the highest quality components that I can source. And I also look for films that are a little older, like maybe the kinds of lost gems that you would find at the bins, or things that are impossible to find and so expensive that you'd never be able to afford to watch them anyhow. And I also am seeking new horror films that would wear VHS really well. And it's this sort of lo-fi punk rock quality of VHS that drives me to seek these newer and exciting horror films that in particular look beautiful, but also challenge me. And that's what led me to Sam and his films, because he's described himself as art house meets grindhouse, and his films really are. And I think that this juxtapose of those two are really well defined on VHS. A little more flesh looks incredible on the format. So
I love it. That's so cool. And I think there is that real fondness for the medium, and it does seem to be growing, that attachment to VHS. I miss my VHS collection, you know. I got rid of them all back in the day, and I do really miss it. Sam, do you miss the VHS days?
I do. I mean, I hung on to my VHS for maybe a little bit longer than other people, but I did eventually say goodbye to them, because it's just so hard to move house when you've got hundreds and hundreds of VHS.
Yes, they're so big.
Which isn't to say that people shouldn't buy 2 VHSs or more from Black Widow, which is Shay's label.
That's right.
And Shay, tell Mike about the logo, because it's one of the things I love most about your amazing label.
Oh, absolutely. So the logo is 2 V's put together in the style of The Witch. And and I designed it, worked with a designer to create sort of a neon sign look to the logo, so it flows together and it glows. It's sort of a salmon pink color, kind of an alluring color.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at it now. It looks amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, that was done by Eric Adrian Lee.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the things that drew me to Shay's label in the first place, which is like just the amazing look of all of her releases. They're all kind of unique and individual, and the logo's obviously fantastic. And so, yeah, it basically has a boutique label approach to the VHS market, and I don't know if I've seen that anywhere else. So I am so excited to be kind of part of this VHS revolution, and hopefully the movies are super collectible, because we're only doing 78 packs, the bundles with everything in. It's $60, and they're selling pretty fast, actually. We put the pre-order page up on Monday, and it's Thursday as we record this, and we've already sold, I think it's 21 bundles from the 78. So anyone listening to this now, please rush and get them, because I want the people who have kind of supported me and have followed me, and obviously Mike, your audience has been absolutely amazing across my whole directing career. So I do want those fans especially to get these bundles. I'm actually surprised by how fast they're selling, but very grateful as well.
Awesome. Well, that is very cool. Well, let me ask you, Shay, before we get into this week's films, just a little bit about your relationship and history with the horror genre then. Have you always been a big horror movie fan?
Oh, absolutely. I don't remember a time in my life when I didn't love horror films or horror stories. So I grew up in the 80s, like many of us did. And my sister and I were left to our own devices every day till about 5 p.m., and we were a bit of a latchkey family, and we'd often go across the street to hang out with the neighbor boys, and they were always watching horror films on VHS in a top loader VCR, those monstrous giant machines. And I have really early memories of Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, and also A Nightmare on Elm Street. And I don't think my mom knew what I was watching, but she would let me watch The Neverending Story, Ghostbusters, Batman '89, and in particular, Aliens actually has very special place in my heart because I do remember seeing that. I was probably around 6 or 7. And I do remember playing a game on the playground called Get Away From Her, You Bitch. Like, I really do. And combined with my love of spooky books and scary stories to tell in the dark and like Goosebumps, I had a fervent and frequent desire to scare my friends. I'd invite them over. I'd tell ghost stories by the fire. I felt so cool if I could really, really scare them. And I moved to Alaska in 1990, and trips to the video store became essentially my entertainment and my religion. I was a pretty boring kid, and to this day I still don't really drink or have any fun, but the cheap thrill and escapism of horror has always struck me and just hit all my buttons. A really good screen kill still makes me shriek. And as a child, or I guess as a near teenager, I nearly bought out the entire horror film section of a mom and pop video store that went out of business, and spent all of my life savings of allowance. So I steadily worked my way through those videos and learned a lot about horror previous to the era of the internet in that way.
Amazing. Well, I'm excited to hear what you both think of the movies we're about to discuss today. There's loads to talk about, so let's get straight into it. Let's begin with our discussion of John McTiernan's Predator from 1987.
In a part of the world where there are no rules.
We pick up their trail at the chopper, run them down, grab those hostages before anybody knows we were there.
What do you mean, we?
Deep in the jungle, where nothing that lives is safe.
You lose it here, you're in a world of hurt.
Showtime, kid.
Knock, knock.
An elite rescue squad
You're bleeding, man.
I ain't got time to bleed.
is being led by the ultimate warrior.
We need the best. That's why you're here.
But now,
What's got Billy so spooked?
there's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no man. They're up against the ultimate enemy.
Holy Mother of God.
Nothing like it has ever been on Earth before.
She says the jungle just came alive and took her.
So we have a gang of U.S. military commandos led by Arnold Schwarzenegger's cigar-chomping Dutch, and they're double-crossed by the CIA when sent on a rescue mission in the Mexican jungle. The team's violent presence attracts the attention of the Predator, an alien warrior hunting the most prized prey of them all, the future governor of California.
Incredible. Perfect synopsis. So let me ask you both a bit about your history with this film. Sam, let me come to you first. What do you think of this movie, and do you remember when you first discovered Predator?
I do, quite vividly, actually, because I came to it in a slightly weird way. My kind of original gateway into horror, I think I might have talked about this on your podcast before, Mike, but basically it was a drum and bass song that sampled Evil Dead, called Scotty
I remember you
by
saying.
Sub Nation. Yeah. And I heard the sample and tracked down the movie on VHS, and I actually had to ask my mates what that was, what film are they sampling here, because there was no internet back then, obviously, and it was exactly the same for Predator and Predator 2. There's a song called Shadowlands by Flytronics which samples both movies, and I was absolutely obsessed with it. And there's actually many drum and bass tracks from the early 90s that sample Predator and Predator 2. There's even one that mashes up dialogue with the Hellraiser theme for some reason.
Love it.
But I think it kind of makes sense that there's so much kind of sampling around these movies, because the Predator himself is very musical. His heartbeat has this amazing rhythm. It's kind of got like quite a cool beat. And he is a sample maniac. He's constantly sampling his environment and kind of playing it back.
So true.
And so from that weird origin, I found these movies and would literally just watch them both over and over again. I love them so much.
I love it. That's fantastic. Shay, what about you? What do you think of Predator?
I really loved Predator, and I did not know what I was getting into when I first saw it. So I watched it on VHS. I rented it from Blockbuster, and it was right around the time that I started puberty. And maybe that isn't a coincidence. Maybe it did something to me. I don't know. But I do remember the shock of the hanging corpses of the Green Berets near the beginning. And I realized I was in for something much different than just an action film. And I do remember my dad coming in and out of the room, who often would, give me a running commentary on whatever garbage I was watching. And he started doing Arnold impressions and had remembered seeing it himself. So yeah, I have very fond memories of it for sure.
Yes. Yeah, I think I put off seeing this film for a while because I dismissed it as just the Arnie action film, and I kind of thought it was going to be another Commando type movie, and so I never bothered watching it for quite a long time. And I think it was around the time that the Alien versus Predator movies came out, so whenever that was, about 2006 or something.
Oh wow!
That was, as a big Alien fan, I was like, okay, well now I need to watch these films, and I need to catch up on the Predator films first, and that was when I watched them, and I could not believe how good the original Predator was, and how stupid I was to avoid it for so long, actually, because it's such a tight, brilliant thriller, isn't it? It's so incredibly paced and so incredibly made, I think. I'm a huge fan of this movie as well. And I think it's a really, as we've talked about already, as we've mentioned already, it's a really interesting blurring of the line between the kind of big Arnie blockbuster action film of the 80s with this kind of almost slasher horror, right? That it's like a really interesting sort of balance of all those kind of genres.
It is, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that Predator especially kind of dials into really primal fears that we all have. So, like, and there's the fact that it's a relatively simple story. Like, it could be drawn on the wall of a cave and you'd still get it.
Yes.
And it has something in common with those original cave paintings, which were kind of warning people against something with teeth coming out of the jungle to get us. Whether that's kind of a camouflaged lizard or a big spider with mandibles or something bigger than us with really sharp claws. The Predator is kind of a bunch of really ancient fears rolled into one. And I think that's maybe why pretty much everyone who watches it loves it, because it's so dialed into something ancient within us.
Yeah, you're so right. It's so, like you said, it's so simple. It's so beautifully simple and so primal. A couple of weeks ago on the podcast, we discussed Ridley Scott's Alien, and I'm sure we'll talk about the sort of maybe the parallels between Alien and Predator, right? But it's that same kind of beautiful simplicity of you've got a bunch of people and a monster basically picking through them one by one, right? And it is like a kind of campfire horror story in a way, but executed very, very differently to Alien, isn't it, as well? That's what's really interesting about it.
Yeah, completely differently, and really kind of interesting politically as well. Like, it can be viewed in different ways depending on your own personal politics. I'm sure we'll get onto that a bit later, but it's also interesting that it kind of travels backwards through cinema history. So it kind of starts as that straight Commando sequel, like it really does feel like a Commando sequel, before moving into a slasher, as you say, before becoming a kind of thought-focused silent movie. The ending is just pure cinema. Like, the last 20 minutes or so is just literally could be a silent film. And so, I think it's an absolute masterpiece. And if it wasn't for Aliens, it would be the best film you've covered so far on this season.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Do you think, speaking of Aliens, this came, a year after Aliens, didn't it? Do you think, Shay, that this movie came off the success of something like Aliens? I mean, is that what this movie was kind of cashing in on, do you think? That kind of big blockbuster people versus commandos, or, mercenaries versus a monster kind of format, I suppose?
I really do. And I think it's a combination of other films that also preceded Aliens, because you have Rambo First Blood Part 2. And I think this idea of an alien coming into into our realm, into this jungle, which is sort of almost so thick and menacing as it's an interior inside of an exterior, our world. And really, you get these mercenaries with absolutely enormous guns that can fire off. I mean, Old Painless can do like 4,000 bullets a minute. It's just insane. And these guys are just mowing through the forest. And yeah, I really think that the groundwork was laid out by aliens. And even to some degree, I think the character of Ripley had a large effect on Predator, because she's such a strong female character. And we'll talk a little bit about Anna at some point, but I also saw her as quite a unique character for an action film of this era. Not entirely sexualized, and doesn't, Sam and I were talking about the Bechdel test and not necessarily passing with this film, but the fact that she is sort of, held in an equal rank by the end of the film is something that was refreshing to me as a young woman watching an action horror film. So,
yeah, and actually, I mean, maybe we should talk about that off the bat, that topic, because it is, right. Is this not the most masculine movie you've ever seen in your life? I mean, it is just like absolute. It's like burly, muscular, sweaty men with guns from beginning to end, isn't it? How do you find that, Shay? Sort of that experience and that, and I guess, like you say, it doesn't pass the Bechdel test by any means, but is that a problem for you watching this film?
Oh no. No, I get a kick out of it. I love the sweaty male flesh. I love the muscles. I think Jesse Ventura is one of the most captivating wrestlers of all time, and it's just amazing to see him really flexing his actual military skill in this movie, combined with the dialogue, which is, I mean, kind of meat-headed, and but there's something, a gateway drug about the masculinity in this film. Like, it lays this groundwork that here are these super tough dudes, but they're actually pretty sensitive and really caring toward each other in the way that a war film would be. You have almost, and dare I say, almost a sexual-like tension between Jesse Ventura and Bill Duke. There really is some affection here, and it's really different. And I think it's something that a lot of Predator knockoff films got wrong. Right? Like after this film, you get the Italian knockoffs like Robo War, you get Fred Olen Ray with Star Hunter, you get even there's actually a Filipino action film called Bangus, which has all of the tropes that you get in Predator, but without really the sensitivity or the charm or the twist on the tropes that they established. Yeah,
you're so right. What about you, Sam? What do you think of that? I mean, this idea that this film it feels a bit like kind of gun and muscle porn, doesn't it, essentially?
Yeah, I've got a kind of theory about that, because I think that this film is about a lot of things, but one of the kind of central themes is it's about a kind of a collision between sex and death. So we talked about kind of primal motivating forces, and those are two of the biggest. And the mid-air arm wrestle, which obviously has been memed to death, rightly so. That just looks like a couple of big veiny dicks to me, Mike.
Yes.
And all the weapons are phallic, but especially Jesse Ventura's, huge gun, the chain gun. And Arnie's got his comically huge knife for the stick around moment. And the action is just orgasmic. It really is.
It is.
And of course, death comes in the form of a vagina-faced monster, and it takes a bunch of human dicks to conquer it. And who is the first person to get killed? It's the skinny guy who keeps making pussy jokes. Alien has a female monster that looks like a penis. Predator has a male monster that looks like a vagina. Alien is about birth and death. Predator is about sex and death, and that's kind of how I see it. How do you feel, Mike?
I love that. I completely agree with you. That's such a good point as well. And I'm always undecided about is whether or not that's intentional in the making and the writing and the directing of this film, or if that's just an interesting byproduct. Do you know what I mean?
What I absolutely love about your podcast, Mike, is Mary Wild's sections, because it doesn't matter if it's intentional or not. It's in the subconscious of the people making the art.
Yeah, you're so right.
I don't think anyone sat down and said, how do we make these arms look like big veiny dicks? But it's there. It's there to be read. The design of the Predator's face, specifically the mouth once those mandibles open. I mean, it's not an accident.
Oh my God.
And there's one other element of the mouth, which is that it has teeth. The vagina dentata concept is there for me. There's danger.
So true. It's so true. And we'll come back, and we've got plenty to talk about with this monster. Let me come back to these guys, particularly then this main cast led by Arnold Schwarzenegger and this cast of characters. What do you think of them, Shay? This group of men that we're introduced to. We don't learn a hell of a lot, do we, about these particular different characters, but what do you think of them all as a whole, and the job that the cast do here, I suppose?
They're an excellent ensemble cast. I think the casting is one of the massive highlights to this film. Their chemistry is spot on. Each of them takes on a little quirk that I read they were able to have a little bit of power over, a little bit of influence, and they just they laugh, they give each other a hard time. They're very driven toward their mission, but ultimately they're an ensemble. And I really I just absolutely love Bill Duke's performance, in particular with Jesse Ventura. I keep coming back to that, but to me it's just a really charming sort of affection between the two of them. And Arnold in particular is just a fascinating person to look at. And you can see his performance is it's hammy, he's working with what he has, but it gets across that he is a certain kind of mercenary up front, and sets the tone for his inevitable arc, which we'll talk about near the end with the Predator, where he goes from being more of just a gun-driven maniac to using his intellect and his cleverness a little more to take down the Predator.
Yes. Yeah, so I totally agree with you. Sam, what about you? What are your thoughts on this cast and Arnie as well as our hero?
Well, I think that the film itself is kind of this perfect blend of politics and cinema. It's very easily read as a critique of American imperialism. That's not too much of a reach. So it's mind-blowing to me that the cast includes 2 directors who made amazing films, so Shane Black and Bill Duke, as well as 2 future governors in Arnie and Jesse Ventura. So it's that merging of politics and cinema. And in terms of Arnie himself, I completely agree with Shay. Arnie is a truly beautiful man to me. I love looking at him too. He's like classical sculpture or something. He's just perfectly formed. And obviously he also has an unusual voice that's fun to impersonate. And he kind of looks like a superhuman, but he's obviously not an Oscar level actor, which kind of gives him a vulnerability and an everyman quality that I think is really appealing as well. Though, if we're going to critique his acting, I do think that the get to the chopper line...
Get to the chopper!
Exactly.
Oh.
I actually think that's really well delivered. I think that's...
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes Arnie surprises. There are some movies I watch him in when I go, do you know what? You actually are a pretty good actor.
Yeah.
And then other times I watch him in other films. I'm like, oh man, this is not good. It's really, sometimes he nails it, doesn't he? And sometimes he doesn't. It's a strange thing.
I've actually interviewed him, and it was for that David Ayer movie that he did, and it was one of the weirdest experiences I've ever had in a junket, because he did absolutely no small talk whatsoever, nothing. And when he was answering the questions, he was full of energy and that charisma that we all know so well. But between when the questions were being asked, there was literally zero energy. He completely shut down. It was very similar to a Terminator.
Yeah, like a robot, yeah.
Honestly, it was one of the most bizarre experiences I've ever had. And it didn't, it wasn't disappointing or anything like that. Like, I'm very lucky that I've interviewed all of my kind of action hero stars from the 80s that I kind of obsessed over, and 90s as well. Like, I've done Jean-Claude Van Damme, who was very interesting, and Sylvester Stallone as well. So they're all really weird dudes, in different ways. But I still love them all. Like, when I don't know how it is for you, Mike, but when you meet these people, even if it's not what you're expecting, it doesn't take away from the experience of watching their movies or the memories that you have of them.
Absolutely. What a weird bunch they were. Like, you're right, Sam. There's it's an interesting thing, isn't it? You could almost do a podcast about the changing sort of action heroes in cinema, right? And how particularly in the 80s, like, these action heroes, Sly Stallone, Van Damme, Schwarzenegger, they were all very much of a certain type, weren't they? These, like, people just that looked like they were tanks or something. Like, I mean, we were all kind of like, audiences were just, and they were the biggest stars in the world, right, at this time. Audiences were obsessed with guys that looked and sounded like these guys, right?
Oh, they really were. And it trickled down into every element of, at least in American society. I saw it a lot in, like, the pro wrestling culture, the sort of the steroid, almost roid rage that you would see in these people. And there's something to it that isn't really present in a lot of the modern day action stars. I think that there's more of a focus on almost athleticism and physical ability, and the action stars that are around today just don't have as much of a priority on really bulging out of their shirts. So it's a sentimental look.
Yeah, that's it. There's a softer side to people like, I don't know, Chris Evans, right? Or some of the kind of the stars of some of the bigger sort of blockbuster movies or action movies that you get today, right? And that has changed. There's a real hardness, I suppose, in a way, to particularly these 80s action stars. And this cast is full of those types.
Absolutely, yeah.
You say that, and it is to a certain extent, but I actually think that this is kind of Predator we're talking about specifically is more MCU than people give it credit for, because these are sensitive guys. They care about each other, they trust each other, and there's this really lovely kind of unspoken loyalty between them. Like, there's the scene where Mac starts shooting at the Predator and is going absolutely nuts, right? And kind of tearing apart the undergrowth. And the guys kind of one by one step up and just join in.
Yes.
They're just shooting at nothing because they trust him. And they know that, right, okay, if he's shooting at something, there's something to shoot at.
Right.
And I do think that those kind of the muscle-bound stars that we have now, like your Henry Cavills or Chris Evans or whoever, it's an important part of their star identity to show that sensitivity.
Yeah, even The Rock, right, as well. Like,
especially The Rock. Yeah, that's a great example. They're caring muscle-bound dudes.
Exactly.
And like Vin Diesel, always going on about family or whatever. Like,
it's so true. But you're right. This movie does have a feeling of that sort of brotherhood to it as well, doesn't it? And I guess, Shay, right, this must have been, again, when you look at when this film was released, a year after movies like Platoon, the same year as movies like Full Metal Jacket. Obviously, this was now a sort of decade after Vietnam. It felt like maybe movies were sort of coming to terms with that, weren't they? And sort of telling stories, I suppose, based on that, it felt like.
Oh, absolutely. And people who lived through those wars were probably ready to start confronting some of those issues too.
Yeah.
Because it's had some time in society to percolate. And there's always a process of grief, I think, that societies go through when they undergo a massive tragic war like that. So Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk a bit about just the look and vibe of this movie then. John McTiernan directing it. It's so fast-paced. It never stops moving. We've got these incredible kind of set pieces. We've got the kind of Predator point of view, vision shots, that kind of thing. Shay, let me come to you. What do you think generally of just the way this movie looks and the way it's directed?
Oh, I love the way it looks. Sam mentioned earlier the claustrophobia that McTiernan has running throughout his films, and that is so apparent in this movie. I mean, almost as much as Bruce Willis in Die Hard climbing through the through the air duct. And McTiernan, I almost has this fluency. I guess he does have a fluency with the way that he presents imagery. Everything moves into itself so seamlessly, and he can amp up the tension and he can kind of release it. Very controlled, and I just get goosebumps every time I watch Predator, and it's probably a combination of the soundtrack. But imagine this film directed by like Menahem Golan Globus, right? Or if this were a Canon film, it would have raging guitar, it would have maybe some synth, and it wouldn't be nearly as powerful or sensitive. And I think McTiernan just, he was interviewed and he talked about seeing films on his eyelids. Like he can close his eyes and actualize the film and then just translate it as he sees it. It's not about reading music as much as it is feeling it and playing it. And he sees himself as, a visual artist in the way that a classical musician is able to portray a beautiful piece of music. Yeah. So, and it's just amazing that this was such an early effort in his career and he just knocked it out of the park.
Incredible, right? Sam, what about you? What do you think, as a filmmaker yourself? I mean, McTiernan, he's not got a huge filmography, right? But the back-to-back, Predator, Die Hard, Hunt for Red October. What do you think of him as a director and how he directs Predator?
I mean, that fact that he released Predator in 1987 and Die Hard in 1988 is just absolutely insane. And it makes him arguably the most influential director of all time in terms of the sheer number of rip-offs of those movies, both in cinemas and direct-to-video. But what they all miss is his kind of insane control of space. Like the blocking in this film is incredible. Every shot feels claustrophobic once they're in the jungle. The close-ups are very close. And even the wides are kind of packed. There's those shots where people are talking in the foreground and there's someone standing in the background. And then you look a little closer and you see that there's someone even further back, slightly out of focus.
Yes.
It kind of makes the audience feel as hemmed in as the characters. So, yeah, that's really great. But, yeah, every decision here is absolutely inspired, especially the score. But we'll get onto that a little later because, spoiler alert, that is my main highlight of this movie. It's awe-inspiring, the music in this film.
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, let's go on to that now then, while we're on this kind of the sort of the look and the making of this film. What is it about the score that sort of captivates you so much?
I think it's a massive element of the film's kind of supreme success. Alan Silvestri also did the Back to the Future movies.
Yeah, and there's
you can tell more than a little. More than a little Back to the Future here. Right. But it gives it this really epic feel. There's, as Shay said, there's no synths here. It's all that sweeping orchestra. And actually, the Back to the Future connection is interesting as a kind of side note because Bill Duke, who's obviously fantastic in this film, he directed an episode of The Twilight Zone called The Junction, which is very, very Back to the Future.
Interesting.
But from the opening moments of this movie, from the very first shots, the music just gives me massive goosebumps every time. It's like, yes, I'm in safe hands. I'm in for a really kind of high quality experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really love it.
High quality is exactly right. You feel like you're in for a blockbuster. And
Yes.
Alan Silvestri, it almost has a John Williams vibe, doesn't it? Like you're about to watch a Spielberg film or something. Shay, what do you think of the score in this movie?
Oh, it's astounding. It's beautiful. And it has so much emotional depth. Like you have the tension in those early themes, but then there's this one theme in particular that I won't even try to hum, but it's so beautiful and so sad. Like you could almost take that out of context and put it in a Hollywood classic romance from the 40s. Like it's just a gorgeous piece of music.
So let me ask you about the horror in this film then, I suppose. I mean, it's such a boring question, that what I'm about to ask, but I've actually already had a couple of people, tweet or write to me being like, oh, why are you covering Predator? That's not really a horror film, right? Which I'm always like, what? Shay, is Predator a horror film?
Oh, yes. It's many things. It's many things, but I classify it as a, I guess you could say a hybrid horror film, but at its heart, a horror film. It is, I think it's a bit of a stalker slasher, which is
right.
controversial, and maybe part of it is a result of the suit because it's just such a massive suit. And a little side note, Jean-Claude Van Damme was originally cast as the Predator. We didn't talk much about that, but he had a suit that was not desirable, a little more insect-like, which I'll talk about insects in a moment here. But he couldn't hang with the suit, and he left the production. And Stan Winston was brought on by Arnold Schwarzenegger, and they designed this mandibled creature with the dreadlocks. And I think Joel Silver actually had a sketch of the dreadlocks. Correct me if I'm wrong. And James Cameron apparently had, pined for a monster that had mandibled teeth. So you get this really like towering and menacing Punisher to this gang. And something that Sam and I were talking about a little bit is that the gang was intended to be, this mercenary gang was intended to be rescuers. And they were double-crossed and violated their most sacred oath and became essentially assassins for the CIA. So they have done wrong by their ethical code. And the tenet of a slasher is essentially punishment. Mm-hmm. But it's this less sort of right-wing punishment, like punishing teenagers doing bad things. It's a little more moral, like you went against what you're supposed to do, and now you're going to get it. And also hearkening back to Sam's point about the jungle and things with teeth coming to get you, I noticed that the Predator is very much like a giant insect. Like imagine the scariest insect, life size. And it's coming at you. And how's it going to find you? It's going to use a heat sensor, like a mosquito, or it's going to tell you're off-gassing, and it's going to find you. And there's this moment where Bill Duke stabs a scorpion and takes it off of Carl Weathers' back and smashes it with his boot. And then there's another moment where the Predator, after this huge, explosive scene, goes back to the site and has a moment of like bonding with this dead scorpion. Mm-hmm. And I wondered, like, why is that in there? Is there some kind of message here?
So right. Yeah. There's lots of just insect imagery, isn't there? You're so right.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's definitely a stalker slasher, especially near the end where you have the Predator just absolutely looming over Schwarzenegger, which is insane too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Schwarzenegger is the final girl, basically, because Anna gets to the chopper.
It's so true. Go on, Sam.
Just to quickly bring it back to Anna, because it's kind of one of the things that I really love about this film, and it's a very kind of fleeting moment, but I think Predator has this meathead reputation where it's kind of like a boys club style movie, but I think the way Anna is treated throughout is actually pretty good, especially that moment where Arnie kind of stops her from picking up the weapon and says, no, if you've got a weapon, you're a target. And for me, like, Arnie has, Dutch has looked at Anna and not looked at her and said, "You're a woman, that's why the predator's not coming for you, because you're weaker." He's looking at her as an equal and saying, the minute you pick up a weapon, you are as equal a target as I am, so don't do it. And yeah, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, you're so right. It doesn't. For a film that is so male, it doesn't. Well, at least to me, and Shay, correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't feel like it lends a kind of leery eye, at least, to our one female character, really, in this.
No,
and that's something,
I felt pretty comfortable with the way that she was treated in this film too. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Sam, I'm guessing you kind of agree, right, that Predator is, among many other things, a horror film, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I could push it even further and make the slightly tenuous argument that it's a folk horror film.
Oh, yeah. I've got that written in my notes. I agree with you 100%, but go on, carry on.
Whoa.
Mike, that is amazing. I love that. Yeah, because it's got that moment where they talk about the legend of the demon who makes trophies of men. And the combination of that kind of ancient local legend of this kind of forest creature that comes with the heat, with the kind of natural setting and stuff. And that feeling that the sins are being punished, which definitely feeds into the slasher genre, as Shay says. But it also kind of feeds into folk horror to a certain extent, like modern man kind of crashing through nature and getting punished for it.
Yeah.
And there's a temporal element there too, because of the fact that he's an alien creature. There's a sort of timeless quality that maybe this alien has been here before and will continue to haunt the jungle. Yeah.
Will always be there. Yeah.
And what were the kind of folk horror elements that you spotted, Mike?
Well, yes, similar to you, obviously the setting, the rural setting, but also that vibe. And this links to something you said earlier, Sam, about how the way the film almost kind of works as going through cinema's history backwards. It feels like this does a thing that movies like the Blair Witch Project do, and certain others, where a character in the modern day will go to the woods and then find their modern life being stripped away and stripped away and stripped away. And, you know, Arnie slowly but surely loses all of he loses his teammates, he loses his weapons, most of them. Suddenly he's carving weapons out of sticks. He's painting mud on his face. He becomes more primal. He's almost devolved, if in a way, you know, by the end of the movie compared to what he was when he arrived on a chopper at the beginning. There's this feeling of going backwards in a way, or sort of becoming something else, something more primal by the end.
I love that. I'm actually getting goosebumps at that. And there's the line earlier in the movie where Anna's kind of the witness to the murder, and the kind of translation is she said the jungle just came alive and took him.
Yes.
And Arnie basically becomes the jungle later on to take the predator. He becomes at one with his environment. So yeah, that's really interesting as well.
And that was a huge shift at that moment too, where he goes from being a, you know, more of just a gun focused fighter to realizing that he has to meet the predator on his level and really start outsmarting and outwitting him. And the montage that happens after that is just one of my favorite scenes in the entire film, because he's not doing pull-ups on vines. He's not pumping up his muscles. He's concocting these dangerous traps to try to catch him.
Like, that's his arc, basically. He starts the film being tricked. So he's intelligent enough to kind of ask questions and stuff, but he still gets tricked in this double cross, right?
Yes.
And then he kind of evolves and uses his intelligence at the end to trick the predator, basically. And I mean, it's not a massive emotional journey, but it is something of an arc.
It is. And that moment, again, that kind of very iconic now moment when he just sort of lets out that primal kind of scream, doesn't he? It's great though. Yeah, that's it. You really feel that moment, don't you? I think. Yeah, I love it. I love the different, you could look at it as a folk horror, you could look at it as a slasher, absolutely you could. Sci-fi, there's even parts of it near the beginning, especially when you see the bodies skinned and hanging upside down. It makes me feel like I'm watching some sort of Italian cannibal movie. Do you know what I mean? Like a kind of jungle cannibal movie or something at that point.
Oh, wow. That's a really good point. Yes, absolutely.
There's a lot of imagery that feels completely, it's entirely horror, and from all sort of different types of horror as well. So let's talk about the monster itself then. You mentioned already, Shay, that kind of interesting sort of insect connection, and that's funnily enough something we've just talked about Alien as well, about the face hugger and the xenomorph and all of that. But what do you think of the design generally and the look of the Predator itself in this movie?
Well, knowing where they started with the original suit with Van Damme,
yes,
to where they landed, it is night and day. And I think the Predator is one of the ugliest motherfuckers, if I can say that. I mean, they
yes.
really honestly is, and just so terrifying and so enormous. The rubber suit kind of quality, I can see the actor struggling. I can see Kevin Peter Hall doing the best that he can with what he's wearing, almost in the way where you're watching a Godzilla movie and you can tell there's an actor in that rubber suit. Mm-hmm. And it's a very endearing quality. And yeah, I think that his mask is pretty interesting. It's not quite as sci-fi as we get with Predator 2, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Yeah. But it is very warrior-like. And I qualify him as definitely one of the scariest looking dudes in the horror milieu.
Yeah, definitely when that mask comes off, right? Oh my God. Yeah, Sam, it's horrible, isn't it? Sam, what do you think of the Predator itself?
Yeah, I just think it's an incredible monster, and because it's all practical, the Predator himself looks as good today as he did in 1987. Like, there are no flaws to this costume or the kind of performance itself. It's just perfect. The visual effects maybe a little bit less so, like the invisibility effects aren't perfect, but even the flaws there kind of give it a unique feel. Yes. And the POV effects are fucking incredible, like clearly influenced by the Terminator's POV, but kind of taken even further. And it really adds to the otherness of the alien, which is kind of what makes Alien scary, right? It's that kind of fear of the unknown and something that's completely different to us.
Yeah. And
everything about this creature, and like even the kind of audio effects, I think are really, really important to the Predator's success. So like that heartbeat that I talked about earlier, but the noise when we cut to the Predator's display, and the kind of clicks and the trills and the weird screams and roars and stuff. It's all iconic, and it all absolutely holds up. It's a really, really layered and intelligent monster design.
Yeah. Yeah, you're so right. And it's and I'm comparing this to the Xenomorph again, because we are going to be talking about soon on the podcast the Alien versus Predator films, but there's something more. He's more, in some ways, more human, right? This is a being that is shaped more human and uses technology, and it isn't quite as classically monstrous, I suppose, as like a scuttling face hugger, right? Or like a big dripping queen alien or whatever. But there is still something very scary about, and I think it was Jen Handorf actually who said that, the scariest things about aliens in movies is that suddenly we're no longer sort of top of the food chain, right? We are now prey to these types of monsters, and you really feel it, don't you, Shay, with this monster in particular, that you kind of feel like you wouldn't well, I certainly felt like I wouldn't stand a chance, surviving against this
I think he'd be twice my height. And I'm almost 6 foot, and that's just to say just how menacing he looks. Absolutely.
Yeah, I really feel like Predator's kind of like an ultimate example of something that's been with us for as long as people have told stories. Like, there's always been stories about monsters, whether they're in ancient myths or fairy tales, and they tend to be a personification of various fears, which obviously includes the fear of the unknown. And obviously space is a great location for the unknown. Aliens can be as bizarre or as incomprehensible as our imaginations will allow, as you see in a lot of cosmic horror stuff. There are kind of less limits when it comes to aliens, and the less limits there are, the kind of less safe we feel. And yeah, it just kind of feels like with this particular beast, like this kind of Minotaur style beast.
Yes.
It's almost like we're watching a striptease because we kind of see from his POV first, then we kind of see him invisibility cloaked, then we see him with this big kind of duck mask on, and then finally he takes it all off, and we see that grotesque and terrifying face. I think the Xenomorph probably is scarier because it's more other. Like you say, the Predator is kind of human shaped, but I still found him pretty scary when I was a kid.
Oh, definitely. More in that sort of, like you said, Shay, that kind of stalker or slasher kind of way, right? In the way that something like Jason Voorhees is scary, I suppose, when you're a kid. You know, it's that similar kind of thing, this kind of unstoppable thing that's coming for you no matter what.
Absolutely, a shape that represents something deep in the recesses of your mind.
Yeah.
And something that you can't stop and you can't predict. And there's just such a menacing quality to the Predator. Yeah. It's interesting that we get his face because the mask is actually more attractive than his face. We get the opposite with Jason.
Yes, you're so true. That's so true. So there you go. We should wrap up and move on to Predator 2 shortly. But before we move on, is there anything else you guys want to mention? Any particular highlights? Any favourite moments that we haven't covered yet that you want to mention? Sam, anything from you?
I just think that it's impressive how timeless it is, really, because we're as far from Predator now as Predator was from the original War of the Worlds in 1953.
Oh my god.
Which is pretty crazy. And yeah, I think it's aged incredibly well, not just because of the special effects, but those kind of political themes we kind of touched on a little bit. But yeah, I think there's a lot of anti-colonialism here, anti-imperialism. These guys are not meathead killer soldiers. They see themselves as rescuers, and they have to get tricked into being killers. And the whole kind of CIA plot relates to a lot of kind of political stuff that was going on at the time, you know, in the 80s, like Reagan, and there's some kind of Vietnam stuff in there as well. So yeah, I just think that if there's anyone listening to this, sorry for spoiling it, because, you know, we have massively spoiled it, but if there's anyone listening to this who hasn't seen it because they were like Mike and just thought, oh, it's just a dumb Arnie action film.
Yeah.
It's a work of art.
It
with
really is.
So much intelligence behind it, whether that's in the filmmaking or the themes they're tackling. And so, yeah, that's kind of my final word on Predator.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. Shay, what about you? Any final thoughts on Predator?
Predator is one of the finest combinations of action, sci-fi, and horror. I think it really is the pinnacle of what it went out to achieve. And absolutely, Sam, it is such a timeless movie. Every time I go back to it, I'm thrilled. I am glued to my screen. I've seen it on the big screen. I've seen it on DVD. I have VHS, and it never gets old. I always have goosebumps. It's really, my review for this movie on Letterboxd is reviewing Predator is like reviewing eating and sleeping. It's just like, it's such a part of cinematic history. It combines so many things that I love. And yeah, it's one of my favorite films of all time.
Oh, it's just so economical in its filmmaking too, don't you think? Like, I don't want to be one of those, like, they don't make them like this anymore type of people, but, you know, you just don't get many action films like this anymore that are like, you know, it's within about 6 minutes into the running time that it's like, right, they're in the chopper, they're on the way to the jungle, we basically know the setup, they drop them in the jungle, and it's like all systems go, isn't it? And I don't know, it's just that pacing what they tell us about each of the characters with so little, and then the kind of, like you said, Sam, it's kind of purely visual storytelling in its final act as well. It's like, this is filmmaking that I don't know whether we get this kind of filmmaking that much in sort of big action blockbusters anymore, and I love it.
Yeah, I think you're completely right, and I think a part of it is, there's a couple of things. It's the fact that McTiernan has that visual storytelling, and modern action films are very, very talky.
Yes.
Like, it's not just the last 20 minutes. You learn a lot about the characters through visuals only. The way they kind of look at each other and that kind of stuff. You don't really have those moments in modern action movies.
No.
Unless it's for a joke, it tends to be. It's not an emotional moment.
Yeah.
Because I think maybe people are worried that the audiences are going to get bored or something. But and it's also, I think cinema, these kinds of movies really miss meatheads. And I think it's where the sequels go wrong, because you want to see these kind of beasts of men up against this beast of a threat.
Yeah.
It's what makes it exciting and kind of like, there's a tension there. Can the best of us beat the best of them type thing? Whereas when it's just like skinny guys or little kids or whatever in the sequels, it just doesn't have that same kind of, I don't know, tension. So anyway, good old Predator, thank you for existing.
I love it. Good old Predator. So there you go. Right, now we are gonna finish this episode in a bit by talking about Predator 2, but first of all, let's go over to this week's Wild About Horror, because Freudian cinephile Mary Wild has plenty of thoughts about this big dripping masculine action horror movie that is Predator.
Hey Mike, Mary Wild here, ready to share some thoughts on the thoroughly enjoyable first and second installments in the Predator franchise. These films convey a disturbing psychological condition, the alienating effect of being watched remotely and intensely. In John McTiernan's 1987 release, bona fide movie star Arnold Schwarzenegger plays Vietnam War veteran Dutch, the leader of an elite paramilitary rescue team recruited to save a foreign cabinet minister and his aide, who are said to be held hostage in a guerrilla territory. CIA agent Al Dillon, Dutch's old war buddy, accompanies the paramilitary team. After members of the guerrilla camp are targeted and killed, Dillon reveals the real motive for their mission: to stop a planned Soviet-backed invasion. Following this, the rescue team is stalked by a hidden presence in the Central American rainforest. The deadly Predator, a technologically advanced alien who uses a cloaking device while hunting humans. Dillon assumes that the guerrillas are responsible for the attack, but it is clear that their pursuer is not a man. The original concept for this film centered on a plot of what is it to be hunted, which was eventually streamlined to an extraterrestrial hunting the most dangerous species, humans, and the most dangerous man, a combat soldier. Predator 2, directed by Stephen Hopkins, stars Danny Glover in what I thought was a very impressive performance. Set in Los Angeles 10 years after the events of the first film, it focuses on the efforts of a disgruntled police officer and his allies to defeat the malevolent technologically advanced alien hunter. LA is the urban jungle beset by both a heat wave and a turf war between heavily armed Colombian and Jamaican drug cartels. It's the ideal hotspot in which the Predator searches for targets. The pressure on Lieutenant Michael Harrigan to solve a strange string of murders is mounting. Harrigan believes the culprit can be found among the warring gangs and drug lords, but FBI Special Agent Peter Keyes knows the truth. The killer is a fearsome extraterrestrial with keen hunting abilities that include superior night vision and the power to make itself invisible. The film starts with the Predator watching a shootout between the police, Jamaicans, and Colombians, observing as Lieutenant Harrigan charges into the firefight to rescue wounded officers. A goal of the sequel was to expand on the predator's origins and motives, showing that the creature has been visiting planet Earth for centuries, that it is interested in closely tracking down, stalking, and preying on humans. My reading of these two films is that they hinge predominantly on a very aggressive type of voyeurism, the pleasure experienced by the predator who watches intently from the shadows, spotting humans by the bodily heat they radiate. This is what turns the creature on, not sexually, but strictly in terms of the eros function, the animating agency, the drive that launches an organism into action. Related to this is the discombobulated, paranoid uncertainty of the predator's targets, humans whom he compulsively looks at and hunts down. I would argue that the effect of this lopsided interaction is a profoundly alienated condition in the target of the covert stalking, and this is what engenders a horror element in these otherwise straightforward sci-fi action movies. In psychoanalysis, voyeurism is a practice in which a person obtains sexual pleasure from observing other people. A voyeur may be engaged in sexual acts, or be nude or in underwear, or dressed in some other way they find appealing. But voyeurism is a deviant manifestation of sexuality that crucially involves looking without being seen in order to become sexually aroused. This connects to scopophilia, which I've mentioned before in the segment on antiviral. This is a type of pleasure drawn from looking at an object or a person. Freud used the term scopophilia to analyze the pleasure in looking, a curiosity which he considered innate to the childhood process of forming a personality. Other theories propose that scopophilia might lead to madness when a person retreats from the concrete world of reality into an abstract world of fantasy. Freud claimed that scopophilia becomes a sexual perversion when, instead of being preparatory to the normal sexual aim, it supplants it. He provided a metapsychological explanation for the instinct of looking, which involved the voyeur-exhibitionist pair and the reversal of activity into passivity in connection with the precise object, the sexual member. The different instinctual currents of seeing are inflected by the voyeur. He tries to see the other's genitals while hiding his own, but who also tries to be seen looking in order to respond to what he believes is the other's desire to see. It's possible to interpret Predator 1 and 2 as elaborate psychosexual fantasies involving insecure guys showing off their phalluses because they know they're being watched. I don't intend this to sound disparaging or chauvinistic. I actually sympathize with the guys here. The many montages of muscle-bound men brandishing handguns, rifles, AKMs, AK-47s, shotguns, machine guns, launchers, pyrotechnic dischargers, and hand grenades in the original Predator, then pistols, Smith & Wessons, Colt Commanders, hardballer long slides, revolvers, submachine guns, Heckler & Kochs, Uzis, Mossbergs, and Iver Johnsons in the sequel designate the frantic desire to conquer the discursive seat of power occupied by the alien's voracious thermal vision. And those are just the weapons used by humans. Don't even get me started on what kind of heat the predators pack in. My point is that these films zero in on an existential tension where humans become acutely aware of their alienation and lack by virtue of the fact that they are constantly surveilled by an unknown entity. The natural response of this disaffecting experience is to reach for the biggest, baddest weapon they can find. The firearm is not just a first line of defense against material bodily harm. It also covers up the imaginary void that causes psychological suffering. Knowledge that the center of power evades subjectivity causes a desperate attempt to reclaim it via the outlandish performance of violence. The excessive display of macho action men prancing around the Predator films donning guns is an unconscious pronouncement precisely of the opposite of power. Under the eroticized, watchful eye of the alien, they feel naked, exposed, and vulnerable, so they choose the path of overcompensation. So yes, the alien is in a discursively privileged position, but this comes with a downside. fear that the power will be stripped away, which in Freudian terms amounts to fear of castration, leading the predator to devise strategies of containment of human bodies. The alien suppressive spying tendencies in both films lead to an overinvestment in human body parts, which become exaggerated, fetishized, over-endowed with meaning, and therefore less threatening as a castrating agency. The alien's vision as a symbol of surveillance takes on a phallic significance, very much aligned with the cinematic image itself that provides a safe distance for the emergence of voyeurism, bound up with the principle of lawless seeing. By appropriating humans as an image, the predator turns them into an object of pleasure while remaining uninvolved in the intimate dimension of their lives. The alien doesn't seek any form of exchange or relationship, but obtains pleasure by seizing the human's image against its will. The goal is not the sight of human body parts that are concealed out of modesty or cultural condemnation, but to dismember the human body altogether. The voyeur watches what is forbidden in order to destroy the physical integrity of humans by substituting a dismembered body for the unified image. The instinct to see is used through disavowal and fetish formation to deny castration. The predator's obsessive gaze turns us into dehumanized objects with no agency, arguably reflecting the pervasive voyeuristic tendencies found in modern culture. Till next time.
A big thank you to the incredible Mary Wild. And don't forget, if you want to hear more from Mary Wild, you can now sign up to her Patreon, patreon.com/Mary Wild, for tons of really fascinating bonus content over there. And you can also follow her on Twitter @PsychStar. Imagine if half of the population turned into rapists and serial killers, and society just completely collapses, basically. Yep. That is the story.
And it is nasty and it's exceptionally depraved, but it's in the sense of spurting geysers of blood.
Yes.
And, complete excess.
Exactly.
And absurdity. Not to say that there's not some scary, tense moments in it, because there is.
It's brilliant.
But it's excellent and much, much funnier than we thought it was going to be.
That was a little clip you heard just there from my conversation with Louise Blaine about one of the most extreme movies I've ever seen. This is a film called The Sadness, and it closed this year's Fright Fest in London's Leicester Square last week. Now, this movie I had heard was one of the most extreme things I was going to see all year, and it really was. I described it on Twitter as 28 Days Later meets a Serbian film. So if that sounds like your sort of thing, then it's definitely worth checking out when/if it ever gets a release. But that's a little snippet of what we had going on over on Patreon last week. Louise Blaine and I attended the UK's biggest horror and genre festival, Fright Fest 2021, in the Cineworld Leicester Square in London. It was such an incredible few days, 5 solid days of back-to-back horror movies. I think we watched over 30 films in total. And on Patreon, we brought 5 consecutive daily mini episodes where Louise and I reviewed every single movie we watched. So as well as The Sadness, we also talked about the new Neil Blomkamp movie, Demonic. We talked about this incredible anthology movie that was shot entirely in lockdown called Isolation, a brilliant folk horror called The Last Thing Mary Saw, which was almost as scary as The Witch for me, and a brilliant Ted Bundy movie, actually, starring Elijah Wood, called No Man of God. I'm not usually a big fan of these real serial killer, true crime type horror movies, but this one was handled really well, and Elijah Wood, right, he's always the absolute stamp of approval as far as I'm concerned. So that was only a few of the many, many, many films that Louise Blaine and I watched and discussed, and all of those mini episodes and all of that Fright Fest coverage is available for Patreons of $5 and upwards. So if you head over to patreon.com/evolutionofhorror, you can sign up now and listen to everything. For the price of $5 per month, which goes towards supporting the making of this podcast, you will get treated to regular bonus episodes, including all of those Fright Fest ones and a whole back catalogue, nearly 2 years worth of other bonus episodes, reviews, mailbags, all kinds of other stuff. You can also sign up at a $10 level, which means you'll have access to a brand new episode every single week, as well as all the bonus stuff I just mentioned. You'll also get to listen to our exclusive mini-seasons. We are currently in the middle of 2 mini-seasons. One is going through the filmography of Alfred Hitchcock, and the other is going through the whole Hellraiser franchise, which thankfully I have nearly finished. So we're going to be kicking off some new mini-seasons for $10 patrons very soon. Patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. Everybody who signs up from the UK will also get sent an Evolution of Horror sticker, and everybody who signs up, no matter where you're from, will also get a little shout out on the podcast as a very special thank you. Speaking of, I'm going to give everybody who signed up in the last couple of weeks a very special thanks. Lots of people to thank. We've had a lot of new subscribers in this last couple of weeks, so a big thank you to Eric J. Stone, Terence Gerard, Ryan Scott, Benjamin Tyler Causey, Blair J, Elliot Cronin, Tony Fathers, Daniel Carver, Bednarek Robert, Shane 2097, Seth Wilson, James Parker, Patrick Conway, Lauren, Mac Kennedy, Andy Cole, Leica Jensen, Krista Gehring, Charlotte Kilpatrick, Louise Valentine, Laura Josund, Colton Haddenham, Dan Murphy, Mr. Thomas, William Furchalk, Angelique Bone, Andy Brown, Ian Watts, Julie Fuller, Piers Berelsheimer, Kia Seward, Heidi Birch, Abby Lechemanan, Kerry Ahern, Jeremiah Kipp, Bo Hayes, Catherine, Lydia Harris, Becky Smith, Cole Long, Adam Dawson, Adam R. Brown, Rachel Meller, Alexa Scott, Jessica Robin, Chris Diction, Veronica, Tommy D, Shane Carson, William Prentice, Todd Ganson, Emily Swanson, Matt Nilsson, Alan Blair, and Justin Crandall. A huge thank you to all of those people. And one more time, if you want to join them, if you want to sign up and get treated to all of that bonus content and support the making of this podcast, then sign up now. Patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. That's patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. Okay, let's return to the second half of this week's episode as Sam, Shay, and I deep dive into Predator 2 from 1990.
Los Angeles, 1997. It's the hottest summer on record. Pollution is choking the city. The gangs control the streets.
It has not been a nice day!
As bad as things are, they're about to get worse. Much worse. Danny Glover, Gary Busey, Reuben Blades, Maria Conchita Alonso, Bill Paxton. Predator 2. He's in town with a few days to kill this Thanksgiving.
10 years after the events of the first film, a new Predator arrives in a sweat-soaked 1997 for a gory LA safari. After observing a wild gang battle involving violent cop Lieutenant Mike Harrigan, Danny Glover, he picks his alpha target but decides to take his time, indulging in some serial killing, adding new skulls to his franchise-building trophy cabinet before facing off against Gary Busey's secret government task force ahead of a final confrontation with the ultimate prize, who turns out to be a real motherfucker.
that synopsis was art in itself, Sam.
That was absolutely perfect.
So, Shay, let me come to you first. What do you think of Predator 2, and how does it compare to the original for you?
Well, Predator 2 is, to me, a different kind of film entirely. We were just talking about the vibe of Predator, and how there really isn't a lot of comedy intentionally.
Yeah, it's very earnest, isn't it? Yeah.
It is very earnest. And not to say that you won't ever have a chuckle, because we definitely all do. I mean, when Jesse Ventura says, he says, I ain't got time to bleed.
Yes.
I mean, I laugh out loud every single time. But there's an intentional comedy in Predator 2. And it comes in a really strange time and in very strange moments. And it starts off heavy with this gun battle and bullets everywhere. It's almost like they were trying to put more bullets in that opening scene than in the entirety of Predator.
Yes.
And it stays at that level just almost all the way throughout. It sort of plateaus. And I've seen Predator 2 3 times now, and it's always a little difficult for me to tease out the details of what's going on, because it just comes at you like a tidal wave and stays in your face. And I think it's on the level of Predator, where it does have a lot of nonstop action, but it doesn't have the nuance and the expansion and contraction that McTiernan infused into the original Predator. But I do like it. And I think it's a great performance by Danny Glover. He's just absolutely balls out the entire time.
Yes, couldn't agree more. Sam, what about you? What do you think of Predator 2?
Well, originally it was going to be more of a kind of direct sequel, with Arnie kind of returning, and
yes,
the setup was going to be another Predator kind of dug through the ashes of the original jungle and found a severed arm and replayed the footage from the first film, because apparently that helmet is also a camcorder. Basically to see who defeated the Predator from the first film, and then would go after Arnie. But as it stands, that's obviously not what we got. It's not as connected to the first film. It's not connected to it at all, really. Nor is it as focused. Stephen Hopkins is no John McTiernan. Even if Judgment Night is incredible, I stand by Judgment Night and that film soundtrack. But he also directed Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, and yeah, this is kind of more in line with that. It feels like a kind of job for hire to try to get a kind of troubled production on course. But yeah, it's interesting. Like, Hopkins was born in Jamaica, and I actually kind of love the Jamaican gangs in this movie, even if they are kind of insanely cartoonish. There's a little bit of guilty pleasure about those sequences for me. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously insane, but I do find this film kind of fun. It is one that I watched many times as a kid, mainly because I really do love Danny Glover in this film. And we talked a little bit on the podcast, Mike, about the fact that I grew up with a black parent, and so as I was a teenager I was kind of seeking out movies with black leads as well. And yeah, the kind of diversity in this film is interesting. We'll get onto it, but there are things to like about this film, though I sense, Mike, that you don't see a lot of them when you watch it.
I don't want to be the miserable one here. But also, what I think is really interesting, I've got a very good friend who loves Predator 2, who, like you, Sam, watched it as a kid, and he said it was one of the few films he owned on VHS at the time, so he watched it over and over and over again, and he loves it. I, as I've already mentioned, came to these films relatively late. I was an adult. Of course, yeah. And I just, for me, watching Predator 2 as an adult, I was like, what is this? I just wasn't a fan. For me, it doesn't have any of that taut thriller, it doesn't have any of the thrills of the original for me. I don't think it feels a bit messy and sprawling and a bit silly. I think after the original film did so well, there were all kinds of things that came off the back of that, right? There were Predator comics and graphic novels and all that kind of thing. And I feel like this is it feels more like you said, Sam, it feels more cartoony, I suppose, for me. And for me, tonally, I think I loved that dark earnestness of the first one, and I'm not as big a fan of the kind of wisecracking cops of this one, you know.
That's very astute, Mike, because you probably won't have read a comic called Concrete Jungle, which is a Predator book that was released before this film, and it actually kind of follows Dutch's brother, who's like a lieutenant. But yeah, it does feature elements. It's got the Predator in the city, and it's got specific elements that may very well have inspired Predator 2. So yeah, this is absolutely more of a comic book style movie, and in the way that actually RoboCop is a comic book style movie without a comic book. Like, RoboCop is very kind of Judge Dredd, isn't he? And
do you know what? I did get a few RoboCop vibes at times in this movie as well. You know, I don't think it's anywhere near as good as RoboCop for me, but something about it reminded me a bit of RoboCop at times, actually.
A little RoboCop 2. I got RoboCop 2 in this one quite a bit.
Yeah, it's that opening sequence mainly, which could come straight from RoboCop 2. Like, it is so RoboCop 2, even though obviously Predator 2 and RoboCop 2 were released in the same year. Yeah. Just as Predator and the original RoboCop were also released in the same year, which is kind of weird.
Wow.
But it also has that kind of media satire feel in the opening stages.
Exactly. The news journalists. I think that was what made me think of RoboCop. Yeah.
Yes.
Even that shot of Harrigan like arriving in the police car. RoboCop could step out of that car and you totally, it wouldn't feel weird. It's really, really similar. But it just kind of fades away, all that stuff, like the media stuff. It just kind of vanishes, basically. There's no payoff to that.
They don't follow through with that near the end. You're right.
What do you think, Shay, of our change of location then? We've gone from the jungle to the urban jungle, right, to downtown LA. What do you think of our new setting?
This environment is almost as inhospitable and dangerous. Yeah. Because there really aren't a lot of people around, with the exception of the subway scene. It feels like an empty shell of a city. And it feels weirdly apocalyptic in a sense. I know that it's only 1997, and we'll talk more about that. but because this was, obviously made before then. But, it's not quite as densely packed and imposing as a jungle. But it does seem like a logical progression. Obviously, the pun of concrete jungle works for this storyline. But I think what I like about this in the city is also its influence on other films which followed subsequently, because suddenly you get a bunch of sequels taking place in the city. Yes. Like you get Beastmaster Through the Portal of Time. You get like Babe in the city. Yes. You're getting all these movies that go to the city. Even The Leprechaun Goes to Vegas. I mean, it's a beautiful thing. So I like it.
I love that.
And of course, Masters of the Universe.
Yes.
And
I've heard that for budgetary reasons, they moved it from New York to LA, because I think it was originally supposed to be Manhattan as well, which I think in some ways makes more sense because of all the skyscrapers and everything. It probably would have had that feel a bit more of that kind of urban jungle than maybe downtown LA does. But yeah.
That makes total sense. Yeah, all the alleys are so nasty.
Yeah.
Everything looks gross and just almost as dangerous, but there's a different kind of danger. It's more of an urban threat. People with knives, people who are going to jump you, are going to shoot you, as opposed to a creature, a snake wrapping around your neck.
And I think there is something interesting, and this is touched upon briefly in the first one, Sam, but this idea that the Predator is basically targets people with weapons, right? Targets people who are armed. And this is a story that is focusing on gang warfare and also cops. Right, and is there something interesting going on in this film to do with that? To do with ideas of gun crime in America, police, gangs, and all this other stuff?
Absolutely. And I just want to quickly correct myself, because Masters of the Universe came out in 1987 as well as the original Predator and RoboCop, which means that 1987 may well be the best cinematic year in history, but let's not digress. No, I think that's one of the strengths of this film, actually, that that investigation of those kind of things, because I think it's a continuation of the first film's post-Vietnam critique of the CIA, who allegedly flooded the cities with drugs and guns that were kind of got through Contras. And side note, there is a Soldiers versus Aliens in the Jungle video game that called Contra that has a Predator Arnie ripoff on the cover. But anyway, conspiracy theories abound about the American government kind of funneling cocaine from Central America through the Bloods and the Crips in LA. And obviously the kind of cartoon gangs in this quote-unquote futuristic LA are playing with those kinds of gang divides. But here, everyone kind of suffers as a result of this drug epidemic. Like, this diverse group of cops who describe their jobs as fighting a war are basically in hell. Like, there's that shot that kind of pans across the police station, kind of sweaty people kind of really tightly packed in together, that's kind of as close as this film gets to the artistry of the original film. That shot kind of looks like a painting, and it really kind of makes you feel claustrophobic. But yeah, the cops are in hell, and the gangs are also in hell. Like, there's that amazing scene. Like, I'm sorry, but I do love the scene where the it's kind of Hellraiser 3-esque sex scene where
I love that.
you have this kind of Hitchcock shot that kind of gets closer to this crazy sex scene, and the Jamaican gang kind of bursts in, what they call the voodoo posse, and they're basically human predators. They're hanging him from the ceiling, they're daubing him in blood, and so then the kind of predator comes in the mix, and all hell really does break loose. But yeah, there is something in this film that is trying to investigate really similar political ideas to the original, and it is the same writers as well.
It is, yeah. Which I kind of find unbelievable.
I know.
Yeah, good point.
But yeah, no, I think there is something there, isn't there? And, you know, maybe apparently they wrote this in 3 weeks. Maybe if they'd had a bit more time. Because it does feel like it touches upon that stuff, and I almost felt like I just wanted a little bit more, you know, of what it was hinting at there. Did you get any of that, Shay, when you watched it? I
did. I have I have a very similar thing written down to what Sam has, which is that, yes, there are a lot of very valid theories that the CIA was successfully funneling drugs into the cities, you know, to sort of fuel this domesticated war on drugs and having a reason to incarcerate mass amounts of people for very small crimes. And it devastated the cities. It devastated everybody in the cities and everyone in the nation. And we're still feeling the effects of that, you know, war on drugs. But the other thing that I noticed is the gang violence right off the bat. It just feels like a backdrop of chaos. And we kind of needed that chaos to recreate the danger of the jungle.
Yeah, and the heat too, right? There's also a heat wave.
And the heat, the sweat, exactly. Oh my God, I love it when you can see the sweat coming through, like Bill Paxton's suit coat. Yeah. Like, he's sweating so hard, and that suit coat looks like a curtain. I mean, it's just like covered in water. But the other thing is that this takes place in the future, you know, only 7 years. And I think that's relevant too, because if this were 50 years in the future, maybe it would be even more dystopian. But there is this sort of slightly dystopian quality that only 7 years away from where we are now, this could be what it's like in the cities. So that's an interesting quality as well.
I totally agree. Let me ask you guys a bit about the cast, because again, in comparison to our group of big, burly, sweaty men, it's a different kind of cast this time round, right? And apparently they wanted Arnie, I believe, right? And then I think due to he asked for more money and his availability and various other reasons, we've got a cast here of, a weird mix. Obviously, we've got Danny Glover, Gary Busey, Bill Paxton, Adam Baldwin, Maria Conchita Alonso. Sam, what do you think of these new characters in comparison to our original cast?
I think it's kind of admirable that they went in a totally different direction. Obviously, Danny Glover's physique is still towering and impressive.
Yes.
But he's obviously not a muscle man. And his character is kind of initially hot-headed and impulsive, which is the opposite of Dutch, who's kind of questioning and cautious to a certain extent. So both characters have a really nice balance. But yeah, like I said, Danny Glover is the reason I watched this movie over and over again when I was a teenager. And I honestly know so many quotes from this film, I basically know it off by heart. I'm not going to do any of them, but yeah, I really, and any film where Bill Paxton turns up, who is part of an exclusive club. I think there's only a couple of people who have been killed by an alien, a predator, and a Terminator. And
that's so true. God. It's like our version of the EGOT, isn't it? That's amazing. Yeah, you're so right. Shay, what about you? What do you think of this cast and Danny Glover as our new leading man?
Well, he's very sweaty, like Arnie was, and he's keyed up to 11 the entire film. He comes out screaming and hurtling towards a shower of gang warfare bullets, and he's also a little bit of an anti-authoritarian, which I thought was interesting because he doesn't really play by the rules. He doesn't want to hand the case over. He can't stand being told what to do, and he won't back off. They do both, Arnie and Danny, get their third act alone with the Predator. And I like the way that Danny kept the intensity throughout the entire film up until that moment. And I think that where Arnie was maybe a little more keen on outwitting the Predator to survive, I think Danny was just on full adrenaline, revenge, having, he's turned whatever instincts he has to fight crime toward fighting the Predator, and there's almost a seamless transition there.
Yeah. So he just goes and to the point where the Predators are like, fair play, we'll let you live at the end, right? It's there it is.
Exactly.
There's an interesting thing, isn't there? I mean, Gary Busey's character, Sam, and this is something we I suppose we didn't mention too much, but the Carl Weathers character in the original, that he kind of duped them all, right, didn't he? In the first one. And there's that same kind of idea. And this is something, obviously, me and Chris Hewitt talked about with Aliens and the Burke character. And this is something you see a lot in 80s cinema. You see it in RoboCop as well. This kind of the real monsters are often not the actual monsters. They're the corporate suits or the people at the top in whatever kind of government authority or whatever body, right? And it feels like, again, they're dipping their toe in those kind of themes again with this movie, aren't they?
Yeah, for example, I would not want to eat a burger that had been made from that slaughterhouse meat if they're spraying radioactive material around.
Yes, exactly.
It's kind of interesting, and it's interesting for Gary Busey as well, because you don't really see him play these kind of straight-laced characters. Obviously, he has the Busey madness in his eyes constantly.
Always.
But yeah, he's kind of a really interesting antagonist, because you almost get the sense that maybe if he'd have been left alone, they would have captured the Predator. Maybe not, because obviously it all kind of goes very Aliens with the them watching the screen of the Predator kind of circling and all the rest of it. But he's a really weird character, because at no stage, you just know. I'm not a detective, Mike, or Shay, right? Just to make this clear, I'm not a detective, but I'm pretty sure I would have worked out that Busey and his boys were not there to investigate murders, but were in fact, the Men in Black or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It is a kind of weird subplot that doesn't really go anywhere again outside of we need an action set piece that feels a bit like Aliens. Let's go to this slaughterhouse and have these guys get taken out. But why the slaughterhouse? Because, like, I got the impression that, because, like, so the Predators, apparently he goes there to feed or something, right? That's kind of how they know he's going to go there. But, like, that seems like bad planning on the Predators' account. And I always thought that he was eating the skin of the people that he skinned, because what happens to that skin? It's not in his trophy case.
It's always gone.
He doesn't wear pelts or anything.
Yeah, good point.
That's true.
So that whole subplot is very confusing to me. But hey, again, any movie that features Gary Busey is a win in my book as well.
Oh, absolutely. I love that the pigs are so much of an allegory for what the predator does to his prey, hanging them upside down. And long pig.
And do you think, though, I feel like, and I might be wrong here, but it felt to me when I've watched it that even though there's so much more carnage, it feels like there's less horror, there's less gore. I don't know, Shay, did you feel that? Like, for me, it feels like it's actually more tame, I think, in a way, than the first one. And I don't know if that's just because, again, it doesn't have that tightness that I love about the original or something, you know?
I thought about that too, because the gore in the original Predator is so striking.
Yes.
And it's so specific. When Carl Weathers loses his arm, it's very obvious he's lost his arm. And you have a moment with that arm. You really feel that arm come off. And there may be more bi-gallon blood in Predator 2, but it's just such a bombastic, hectic film that it kind of just washes away. I don't know. I think the weaponry is definitely more interesting in part 2. That's the part of the effects that I really enjoyed the most. And they're pretty good kills. There's some freaky stuff.
Yeah.
But there's like a body that's hanging that looks pretty obviously a, rubber body. I think there's some horror films that just have more striking gore for whatever reason. Like Blood Rage is one of those films where the effects are so excellently executed, and maybe there isn't a large quantity, but the memory of it sticks with you much more than something that's coming at you 90 miles an hour.
And that's so true, isn't it? And Sam, what do you think? I mean, as someone who's seen this film a lot more times than I have, it has this movie got more gore than the first one, do you think?
I wouldn't say it's got more gore. I mean, it has in a way, but I think that where it's mainly different is it's nastier. So the Predator in this one, I'd say, is kind of more of a sadist. In the first one, he's kind of very focused as a hunter, whereas this one feels more like a killer. He's kind of more brutal. It feels like there's more close kills. And there's a lot more kind of tormenting here with the vocal samples. There's a kind of subtle moment that exemplifies this Predator's kind of personality, and that comes when he repeats the "want some candy" line to Bill Paxton's character. How did you guys interpret that moment? Because I think it's an example of this Predator being quite cruel.
It's creepy, isn't it? That's a moment of sort of, you're right, of sort of genuine, cruel sort of creepiness. And
I think he's saying to Bill Paxton's character that basically, you're as threatening to me as a child. Like, you are not a threat at all. And I definitely think there's that kind of creepy cruelty there that tips this maybe a little bit more into straight up horror, because I have no idea what this Predator's motivations are. Like,
no.
He literally sees the alpha, like, they have a face off within the first 10 minutes of the film, right? And I know that in the original, like, the Predator kind of works his way up to Arnie being like the kind of ultimate prize. But it really seems a bit haphazard and random in terms of the people that this Predator kills.
100%. Yeah, he has the opportunity to kill Danny Glover at the beginning, doesn't he? And doesn't. But then it kind of goes all over the place, doesn't it? It's quite random. Yeah, you're so right about that. And in an interesting way, at the same time, this is also a movie that kind of expands, so like so many sequels do, I suppose, it expands a little bit more on the monster, doesn't it? And the like, it feels like we learn very little about